Welcome to Javel Stories. Before we continue with the story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell to always get notified for upcoming stories, and also share the story with loved ones and friends. Thank you very much. A long time ago, in a little town with dirt roads and tall trees, there was a man named Samuel. People didn't call him Samuel, though. They called him Snake. Nobody trusted him because he was sneaky and always looking for a way to trick people. Samuel loved to play games where people bet money. He traveled far and wide, going from town to town, searching for anyone willing to play with him. Some days he was lucky. He'd win lots of money and walk home with shiny gifts wrapped in colorful cloth. Other days he wasn't lucky at all. He'd lose everything and return home with empty hands and a heavy heart. Samuel had a tattoo of a snake on his back. It was a large, winding serpent with sharp eyes that seemed to look right at you. When Samuel walked, people said it looked like the snake was moving. "That man is as slippery as a snake," folks in the town would say. One cold winter night, Samuel was playing a game with some strangers. The game didn't end well, and a big fight broke out. Samuel's story ended that night in the snow, but his family's story was only beginning. Back in Samuel's little house, his wife, Emily, had a hard time keeping everything together. She worked all day in the fields, planting crops and gathering food to feed her children, David and Sarah. David was the older of the two. He was quiet and strong, always helping his mother with chores. Sarah was smaller and loved to laugh, even when life was hard. She had a way of finding joy in little things like watching butterflies or playing with stray kittens near the house. Life wasn't easy for Emily, David, or Sarah. They didn't have much, but they stuck together. At night, when they sat by the fire, Emily told stories about Samuel. She didn't talk about the bad parts of his life. Instead, she focused on the lessons they could learn. "Your father made choices," she would say, "and those choices had consequences. Remember that your choices matter, too." David and Sarah listened closely. They missed Samuel sometimes, even though they didn't see him much when he was alive. They remembered the times he came home with gifts and told funny stories, but they also remembered the times when he returned with nothing and sat in silence, staring at the floor. One day, David promised himself, "I will grow up and make life better for us. I will make good choices." He didn't know how he would do it, but he was determined to try. As David grew older, it became clear that life at home was becoming harder. Emily worked from sunrise to sunset, but it was never enough to keep food on the table. David hated seeing his mother so tired. He decided it was time for him to help in a bigger way. One morning, Emily sat David down by the fire. "There's a family in town," she said. "They need help with their house. It's hard work, but they'll pay you and you'll have a roof over your head." David didn't want to leave his family, especially Sarah, but he knew he had to. He hugged his little sister tightly. "I'll come back," he promised. "I'll make things better for us." The house he went to was very different from the small home he'd grown up in. It was large, with tall windows and shiny floors. The family who lived there had everything they could ever need, but they didn't seem very happy. David's job was to help in the house and take care of their son, Thomas. Thomas was a strange boy who rarely left his room. He spent most of his time sitting by the window, staring outside. David brought him food, cleaned his room, and made sure he was comfortable. At first, Thomas didn't talk to David at all. But one day, while David was sweeping the floor, Thomas said, "Why do you work so hard?" David thought for a moment before answering. "Because my family needs me to," he said simply. Thomas didn't reply, but he seemed to think about David's words. From that day on, he started talking a little more. Life in the big house wasn't easy. Thomas could be demanding, and the family expected David to do his work quickly and without complaint. But David always tried his best. Thomas was curious about David's life. One afternoon, he asked, "Where is your family?" David smiled softly. "They're back in the village," he said. "My mother works in the fields, and my sister helps her. They're the reason I'm here." Thomas frowned. "It sounds like you work all the time. Don't you ever get tired?" David laughed. "Of course I do. But my mother always said kindness and hard work make life better. So I keep going. Thomas didn't say anything, but the next day, he surprised David by offering to help him clean his room. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over time, David's patience and kindness began to change Thomas. The boy started smiling more and even laughed once or twice. One evening, as David finished his chores, Thomas said, "You've been good to me, David." "Thank you." David was touched. He realized that kindness could make even the hardest days a little brighter. After a year of working in the big house, David decided it was time to move on. He had saved a little money, and he wanted to visit Sarah and see how she was doing. The family thanked David for his work, and even Thomas gave him a small gift, a simple wooden carving of a bird. "For your kindness," Thomas said shyly. David packed his things and set off on the road. The journey to the city where Sarah worked was long and tiring. He walked for days, sleeping under the stars and sharing food with strangers he met along the way. Finally, he reached the bustling city. It was nothing like the quiet village where he'd grown up. The streets were filled with people rushing in every direction, and the air was thick with smoke from the factories. David felt a little overwhelmed, but he was determined to find Sarah. He asked around and eventually found the factory where Sarah worked. When he saw her, she looked thinner and more tired than he remembered. But when she spotted him, her face lit up with a smile. "David!" she cried, running to hug him. David felt a lump in his throat. "I promised I'd come back," he said. Sarah led David to the small room where she lived. It was tiny and cramped, with just a bed and a table. David could tell that life in the city had been hard on her. Sarah explained how she worked long hours in the factory, sewing clothes for people she'd never meet. The work was tiring, but she was proud of what she could do. "I think about home every day," Sarah said, "but I have to keep going. Mama would want me to." David admired Sarah's strength, but he could see she wasn't well. Her cough worried him, and she seemed to get tired easily. David decided to stay in the city for a while and look after Sarah. He found work at the market, helping to carry heavy crates and load carts. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to buy food and medicine for Sarah. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk about the village. "Do you remember the old tree by the river?" Sarah asked one night. David smiled. "Of course, we used to climb it and see who could reach the highest branch." Sarah laughed softly. "I always won." David promised himself he would find a way to take Sarah away from the factory and give her a better life. David's days in the city were long and challenging. Every morning he woke before sunrise and went to the market to lift heavy crates and load them onto carts. Though his body ached, he never complained. He thought of Sarah and her smile when he brought home warm soup or fresh bread. Sarah's health didn't seem to improve. Her cough grew stronger and her thin frame worried David more each day. She tried to hide her struggles, but David could see how tired she was. One evening, as they sat in their tiny room, Sarah spoke up. "You've done so much for me, David, but you can't keep working yourself to the bone." David shook his head. "I won't leave you here. You're my sister. We're a team, remember?" Sarah smiled weakly. "We've always been a team, but maybe it's time we go somewhere else, somewhere quieter. I can't stay in this city much longer." David thought about her words. He had been saving every coin he earned, and he knew they had enough to leave the city and start fresh. But leaving meant taking a risk, and David wasn't sure if they could make it in a new place. That night, as Sarah slept, David stared out the window at the city lights. He thought of his promise to make things better for them. With determination in his heart, he decided they would leave the city and find a safer, happier life. The day finally came when David and Sarah packed their few belongings and left the city. The air was cold, and a light drizzle fell as they walked through the crowded streets one last time. David had found a quiet village far from the noisy factories. He had heard about it from a kind merchant at the market. "It's a peaceful place," the merchant had said. "Good people, clean air, and lots of farmland." The journey was long. David and Sarah traveled by foot for days, stopping to rest under trees or near rivers. Along the way, they met kind strangers who shared bread and warm blankets. At night, as they sat by small campfires, Sarah told David stories to keep their spirits up. Do you remember when we used to chase fireflies back home? She asked, her voice soft. David chuckled. You always caught the most? You were faster than me. Though the journey was tiring, it brought them closer together. They encouraged each other to keep going, even when their legs ached and their stomachs rumbled. Finally, after many days, they reached the village. It was as beautiful as the merchant had said. The air was fresh, the fields were green, and the people greeted them with warm smiles. David and Sarah found a small room to rent in the village. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and cozy. The villagers were kind and offered David work on a nearby farm. David woke early every morning to tend to the animals, plant seeds, and water the crops. It was hard work, but he felt proud of himself. He enjoyed working in the open fields with the sun on his face and the sound of birds in the air. Sarah, too, began to feel better in the peaceful village. She spent her days walking along the river and gathering wildflowers. The fresh air and quiet surroundings helped her recover her strength little by little. One day, as they sat under a big oak tree, Sarah said, I feel like I can breathe again. This place feels like home. David nodded. We'll make a good life here. I'll work hard, and we'll build something to be proud of. The siblings felt a sense of hope they hadn't felt in years. David quickly became an important part of the farm. The owner, Mr. Henry, was an older man who appreciated David's dedication. You're a hard worker, David, he said one morning as they planted rows of corn. If you keep this up, you might have your own farm someday. David liked the idea. He imagined himself running a farm, growing food for the village, and making a good life for Sarah. He shared his dreams with her one evening as they sat by the fire. I think you'd be a great farmer, Sarah said with a grin, but you'll need someone to help you with all those animals. David laughed. Maybe you can be my assistant. Their days were filled with hard work, but also with laughter and moments of peace. The villagers welcomed David and Sarah into their community, and they began to feel like they truly belonged. One sunny afternoon, while David was helping to shear the sheep, he met Anna, the farmer's niece. She had a bright smile and kind eyes, and she loved animals as much as David did. Anna and David quickly became friends. They worked together on the farm, sharing stories and laughing as they cared for the animals. Sarah noticed how happy David seemed when Anna was around. Anna's nice, Sarah said one evening as they walked home. I think she likes you. David blushed but didn't say anything. He wasn't sure if Anna felt the same way, but he enjoyed spending time with her. Over time, their friendship grew into something more. David realized he cared deeply for Anna, and she felt the same way about him. David and Anna spent more time together as the seasons changed. They worked side by side on the farm, helping the crops grow and taking care of the animals. Anna always had a cheerful laugh that made even the hardest days feel lighter. One evening, after finishing their work, David and Anna sat under the shade of an old oak tree. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the fields, and the breeze carried the sweet smell of blooming flowers. Do you ever think about what the future holds? Anna asked, looking out at the horizon. David smiled. I do. I think about running a farm, building a home, and sharing it with people I care about. Anna looked at him, her cheeks turning pink. That sounds like a wonderful dream. David decided it was time to share his feelings. Anna, he said softly, you've been a big part of my life here. I don't know where I'd be without you. I care about you deeply, and I want us to build that future together. Anna's face lit up with a smile. I feel the same way, David. Soon after, the two of them announced their plans to marry. The village was overjoyed, and everyone pitched in to prepare for the celebration. The day of the wedding was bright and sunny, with a sky so blue it seemed to stretch forever. Villagers hung colorful ribbons and flowers around the farm, turning it into a place of beauty and joy. Sarah helped Anna get ready for the big day. She braided Anna's hair and added little white flowers to the braids. You look so beautiful, Sarah said, wiping away a happy tear. David, too, was busy. He wore a new suit given to him by Mr. Henry, who stood proudly by his side. You're like a son to me, David, Mr. Henry said with a pat on the back. You've worked hard, and you deserve every bit of happiness coming your way. The ceremony was simple but filled with love. Under the big oak tree where they had first talked about the future, David and Anna promised to take care of each other forever. The villagers clapped and cheered as the couple exchanged smiles, their eyes shining with happiness. That evening, the village came together for a grand feast. There was music, dancing, and plenty of laughter. Sarah sat next to David, her heart full of joy. "This is the beginning of something beautiful," she said. Life on the farm became even happier after the wedding. David and Anna worked together, making plans to expand the farm. They wanted to grow enough food to share with the entire village. Meanwhile, Sarah found her own calling. She loved spending time with the children in the village, teaching them how to read and telling them stories. The children adored her, gathering around her like little ducklings wherever she went. One evening, Sarah shared an idea with David and Anna. "I want to open a school," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "There are so many children who don't have a chance to learn. I want to change that." David and Anna thought it was a wonderful idea. They began talking to the villagers, asking for help to build a small schoolhouse. People donated wood, nails, and even their time to make Sarah's dream come true. When the school was finally finished, it stood as a symbol of hope and kindness. Sarah spent her days teaching and laughing with the children, feeling like she was finally making a difference. Years passed, and the farm and school both thrived. David and Anna had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who loved running through the fields and playing with the animals. Sarah became a beloved figure in the village, known for her wisdom and warm heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, David, Anna, and Sarah sat together by the fire. The children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Sarah asked, looking at her brother. David nodded. "I think about it all the time. We started with so little, but look at what we've built." Anna added, "It's because you both worked so hard and stayed so kind, even when life was tough." David smiled. "Kindness and hard work, that's what Mama always said." As the fire crackled and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, David felt a deep sense of peace. He thought about Samuel, the man everyone called the snake, and how his choices had shaped their lives. But David had taken a different path, and now he could see how it had led to a life